Hi everyone, welcome to week 8. You have made it to the halfway point. So from here on out, everything is just heading towards the end. You're 8 weeks in, and the 8 weeks that we have left will probably fly by, and hopefully that will happen in a good way. So as I promised, I wanted to talk this week about introductions and conclusions. And within that conversation, we'll talk about thesis statements because they're an integral part of your introduction. And I have found that so many students feel very nervous about constructing their introduction. They're just really not sure what goes in it. And so they end up either having too little in the introduction, where it is broad and vague and just really doesn't serve the function that it needs to of drawing the reader into the topic. Or I've seen it go the other way, where the introductions are so detailed and cover so much that they almost leave nothing left for there to be done in the rest of the paper, and the student tries to include too much information in an introduction. And so with this first couple of videos here, we'll be talking about the introductions and thesis statements, and then a little bit later on we will get into conclusions and how to write an effective conclusion. So let's start by looking at the functions of an introductory paragraph, and I will be coming back to each one of these bullet points to show you an example and give you an idea of how this would look in a few different papers, student papers, some work that I've written, so you'll have a variety of things to look at. Now, the first thing that your introductory paragraph needs to do is capture the reader's attention. You want to motivate them to keep reading and to stick with you on this. The next thing that you need to do is give a little bit of background on the topic. You never want to assume that your reader is going to know as much as you do about this topic. Sometimes it might be safe to assume that they are fairly familiar with the topic and you don't have to go into as much detail, but for the purpose of our class, I'd really like you to assume that you're writing for someone who just has not looked into this topic at all, because that is going to be the situation of most of your peer reviewers. So whatever you can tell them to establish context for them is going to be incredibly useful. The third thing that you're looking to do with your introductory paragraph is build the reader's interest. So what can you tell them, and sometimes that can pair up with providing background, but what can you tell them that's going to keep them wanting to go forth and find out what you have to say on the topic. The next two steps, developing a rapport and setting the tone of the essay, are very important. Rapport means establishing some kind of a connection or building a relationship with your readers, giving them a reason to trust you, letting them know that maybe that you're not going to be biased, that you're not attacking, or just whatever it takes to help them to feel like they want to go on this journey with you through the rest of this paper. The tone for the essay, as much as we are doing very objective research this semester, that doesn't always mean that the tone has to be completely dry and academic. It's absolutely possible to have a somewhat tongue-in-cheek or sarcastic or even ironic tone. It is possible to have perhaps a humorous tone to your essay. And then, of course, it's perfectly appropriate to have just a very serious, formal tone to the essay as well. But if we think about some of the best essays in history, and for me, the essay A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift comes to mind. It's very ironic in how it's trying to criticize the society that he's writing about. So you can think about different kinds of feelings that you want to generate in your reader as they go through your essay. All right, the next function of the introductory paragraph is that it's going to guide the reader to your thesis statement. So we're going to take the reader by the hand and gently walk them through enough information that when we get to the point that we want to make a statement or a claim about our topic, they're ready for it and they're open to hearing what we have to say and seeing what our position might be. Now, if we've done these 6 things well, then we have answered the important questions that an introduction needs to answer. What is this? Okay, what is this paper all about? Why am I going to be reading it? And what do you want me to learn? These are the questions going through your reader's head as he or she approaches your paper. Right? So if you've established a strong introduction, you've answered those questions, and you've convinced the reader to stick with you throughout the rest of the journey. So let's take it different ways. Take a look at different ways that you can capture the reader's attention. And sometimes these are called grabber statements or hooks, like you're hooking the reader and pulling them into your essay. One of the first ways that you could do this would be to ask a question. And this is always a recommended technique. It's one, however, that I really suggest that you use sparingly. And if you are going to ask a question, don't leave it hanging there. Don't pose the question and then never come back to it. Rhetorical questions really accomplish nothing. You want to, in your introduction, perhaps suggest the answer or demonstrate how this question leads into the ideas that you have about the topic. Or when you get to your conclusion, maybe return to the question and demonstrate how what you have done in your paper has served to answer that question. But don't just ever leave it out there all by itself. So this example that I have for you comes from an essay about green building trends and green building materials. Right? And the essay started, "Wheat seems a perfectly logical ingredient to find in one's kitchen cabinets as a part of a breakfast cereal recipe, but as the cabinets themselves." So it's posing a sort of a what the heck kind of a question, not necessarily a have you ever done this sort of a question. But the essay went on to answer this by explaining how wheat actually has been developed into a green building material, and then that led into a more focused thesis about green building practices. A second method for grabbing the reader's attention is to relate a startling incident. And this might be one or two sentences that you need to convey this, this short, not really an event, you're not really telling a story with this idea, but just this short fact. This example comes from an essay on childhood obesity. Children of the 21st century may be the first generation to actually experience a shorter average lifespan than their parents' generation. Okay, so it's a statement of fact and a statement of a current situation, definitely a startling idea, would get the reader wondering, why is that? Okay, what are you going to tell me about this? A third method is to start with a vivid quotation. And if you are going to use this method, you want to be sure that the quotation comes from someone or is in some way very closely tied to your topic. So maybe quoting an expert in the field, maybe quoting a person who has been working with this topic or has researched this topic for years and years. And if necessary, with a vivid quotation, you might need to follow it by identifying who the speaker was or what was the situation for them speaking and giving that quotation. So here we have an essay that was about the relationship between Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart. And it started out with, this was her first on-screen line to Humphrey Bogart. "You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow." Lauren Bacall delivered this classic flirtatious line as her on-screen debut in the 1944 production of To Have and Have Not. The introduction went on to explain that Steve was played by Humphrey Bogart, and that was the first time that they met, and so then it led into an explanatory essay about that situation. All right, our fourth way to get the reader's attention, you can give a surprising statistic or other fact. This is a little bit different than the startling incident because we're dealing with far more specific details. The first example comes from an essay on organic farming. The years 2005 to 2008 saw a 52% increase in the number of organic farms in the United States. Okay, to someone who knows nothing about organic, that might seem kind of surprising, and 52% is a pretty big number, so it's going to get them reading. The next example comes from an essay about the hospice care movement. The Hastings Center, a bioethics research institute, published a report in 2003 that revealed most Americans would like to die peacefully at home, surrounded by people they care about. Now notice I have this single quotation here to indicate that in the original essay, that was quoted material. My quotation marks here indicate that I've copied this out of a published essay. Right, and finally, not finally, there are a couple more, but the next way to get the reader's attention is to provide a little bit of background, just a short acknowledgement of your topic, and it written in such a way that it gets the reader wanting to find out what you're going to talk about more. So this example came from an essay just about ebooks. With the release of its ebook reader, the Kindle, in 2007, Amazon.com set forth on the path to revolutionize how people read. Now, what makes that attention grabbing is that word revolutionize. You want to know, well, how would this be considered a revolution? Okay, so that background. And then finally, you can grab the reader's attention with a short anecdote. Anecdote meaning a short story or an account of an event. And an anecdote might be its own paragraph. So you might start with a short paragraph that is your anecdote, and then have a paragraph that follows it that does the rest of the job of the introduction. So I want you to start to think about the fact that an introduction can actually be a 2-paragraph situation. It doesn't always have to be accomplished in just 1 paragraph. So in this case, the thesis statement isn't going to appear in the first paragraph of this essay. The essay is about social networking sites like Twitter and Facebook, and how they have started to make all of us much more self-aware, not necessarily in a good way, that we're always self-promoting and wanting other people to know about our lives, and really getting out there with that. So the anecdote was the story about Narcissus, who in Greek mythology loved only himself, couldn't find anyone else he thought was beautiful enough to fall in love with, finally found love in a reflection of himself. That was the only person good enough. But by spending all of this time looking only at himself, he wasted away and died. Okay, so it sets up how this idea of being narcissistic can be negative, and it went into social networking sites. Now, in the next video, we'll move on and discuss some of the other functions of an introductory paragraph.